The Double Tower, The History of Zloigm the Necromancer, by Lynn Carter. Requiring solitude wherein to pursue his study of the antique Goetes, Zloigm, premier archmage of the race of sentient Ophidians which immediately preceded man in the dominion of this planet, turned from the teeming basaltic warrens of his kind to the desolate and uninhabited plateau of the interior of the primordial continent of the serpent men. There, among steep scarps of glittering obsidian, cleft by vertiginous chasms whose silence was riven only by the intermittent spouting of geysers, he found at last the solitude which he desired. Where fuming volcanic peaks soared to pierce the zenith, on a flint-strewn plain which shuddered ever to interminable subterranean convulsions, he caused to be raised his lonely tower of ebon glass by the bitter shores of a black tarn, and commenced his studious inquiries into the most abstruse and recondite of the elder thaumaturgies. Fundamental to the acquisition of this wisdom was the forbidden science of necromancy, and in the practice of this penumbral and gruesome craft had Zloigm become proficient to a superlative degree. From the indistinct lips of the specters of the most celebrated of primordial mages, conjured hence by his art from remote and fabulous bournes, he wrung the most jealously guarded formulae and litanies, and the secrets of the most legendary of the pentacles and sigils of lost antiquity, which had lapsed from mundane knowledge aeons before. Those phantoms which proved stubborn or disobedient to his will, he cowed with the threat of certain spiritual rigors and torments, or else prisoned within the surface of a mirror of black steel where they must dwell forever, trapped in a hell of 2 dimensions only, until they repented of their obdursaries and yielded up to Zloigm the cantrips or invocations or liturgies of which he required knowledge. Betimes, for greater convenience, he fleshed such phantasms within gaunt and umber mummies transported to his lone and solitary abode from many a hidden crypt or buried vault, or lost in immemorial necropolis, by powerful genii bound subservient to his word. And many the frightful secret of an age-forgotten demonology was hoarsely whispered to him by the dry, worm-fretted lips of some withered lich, wrapped in dusty cerements redolent of ancient spices and the sharp mineral stench of tomb natron, which housed the captive ghost of some prehistoric wizard of repute. On yet other such occasions, a spirit thus conjured up from the depths of time was forced to vivify a cunningly contrived automaton of sparkling brass, or grotesque idols of rough-hewn and porous lava, magically rendered capable of audible speech. Over the lapse of interminable years, having by these means exhausted the arcana of the purely mundane sorcerers of extinct civilizations of the Forgotten Prime, Zloigm eventually came to cast his questing spells yet further afield, and into his conjurational circle he summoned the spiritual essences of weird and monstrous beings, ultra-telluric magi which dwelt on distant planets remote in either time or space, or made their abode in the husks of burnt-out stars, or within the radioactive nuclei of certain far-wandering comets. So adept had the Ophidian magus become by this time in the tedious and exacting art of the invocation of spirits, and to so adroit and subtle and profound a magistry had he attained, that it was not only within his power to summon up the apparitions of the dead, but of the living as well, whose astral or spectral counterparts he could force to him even across the untold distances of interstellar or transgalactic space. And many and unthinkably alien were the bizarre abnormalities he called to his circle for due questioning. Some there were who, in their normal sphere, were accustomed to go about on 2 legs, or 4, or 6, and some that lacked the pedal extremities entire, and slithered on their bellies in the quaking slime like unto gigantic worms, or swam in the perpetual night that reigns in the uttermost depths of nameless seas, or drifted aloft forever on the eternal winds of storm-lashed worlds upon untiring and rigid pinions of animate crystal. With one extraterrestrial intelligence in particular did the magus desire to hold converse. He had learned of its existence from a race of sagacious anthropods who dwelt in caverns beneath the crust of a frozen satellite which revolved about the double star Pornox in the constellation of the Manticora. The insectoid sages spoke of this being, whom they knew by the unpronounceable name Crixil, in the most enthusiastic terms, for they held its attainments in the arcane philosophies in the highest esteem. They described it to Zloigm as an intelligent, crawling white mold, which was the lone and solitary denizen of an otherwise deserted world, circumambulant to a dim and nigh extinguished sun called Klur, which was situated in the very remotest of the spiral nebula, in those regions adjacent to ominously rumored Shagai, which lies near the ultimate verge of angled space. The sentient Crixil, however, proved obdurate in the extreme, and Zloigm was forced to employ the most dire and stringent modes of persuasion at his command. But the philosophic mold succeeded in resisting every conjuration in the grimoire of the Necromancer. At length, grown frustrated by the obstinacy of the mold entity, Zloigm cast aside all prudence and sonorously intoned a ritual of such supernal and transcendent authority as to command even the presence of one of the elder gods. As he enunciated the monstrous cacophonies of this frightful incantation, the heavens darkened ominously. The ivory moon veiled her pallid visage in mist, as if reluctant to attend the ultimate blasphemy, and the wan and timid stars fled, one by one, from the nocturnal zenith. Beneath the audacious necromancer the earth shuddered, and the very foundations of his tower groaned aloud as if in protest, but naught deterred the Ophidian from the consummation of the ritual. There soon materialized before Zloigm a dim luminescence, a haze of light, a blur of phosphoric ectoplasm which floated insubstantial as a vapor within the triply drawn circle of power. But albeit his endeavors at invoking the spirit of the mold savant had at last eventuated in success, naught Zloigm could do would force the apparition into speech. To his several attempts to extract from the recalcitrant Crixil the ultimate arcana of his magistry, the phosphorescent spectre preserved a truculent and adamantine silence. In vain did the ireful necromancer threaten the entity with the Ygir incantation, the Nagao elixir, and with 9 periapts carven from the ivory teeth of pterodactyls. Likewise did it remain obdurately silent before the Scarlet Sign, the Z-Light, and the Chian Games. Even the curse litany of Glorn, which he recited in the Zoo language, failed to excite it to speech. Wearying at last of his pointless inquisition, Zloigm uttered the greater dismissal, and, obliterating the 9 pentacles of Scandron, and extinguishing the sanguinary luminance of the 7 lamps of hollowed ruby, he broke at the 4 cardinal points the triply drawn circle of phosphoric powder, and closed his book. Fatigued to the extremities of his vigor by his unremitting thaumaturgical labors, the Ophidian necromancer glided from the conjurational chamber, and sought to recreate himself by a stroll through the gardens adjacent to his tower. This pleasaunce, however, to his surprise and consternation, he discovered no longer to exist. Instead of his topiary garden of bizarre Mesozoic flora, he found himself amidst a fetid grove of loathsome and tumescent fungi, whose swollen and phallic and hooded crests soared swaying to every side, exuding a singularly vile and noxious putrescence, even as their glistening and spongy bowls were stained and blotched with the rancid cankers of oozing and liquescent decay. Unable to easily account for this cryptic phenomenon, Zloigm traversed the fungus grove with the boneless and undulant grace of his kind, fastidiously avoiding the slightest contact with the pustulent and sickening growths. He sought instead the peaceful shores of the bitter and lonely tarn, where it was oft his wont to stroll the crystalline strand in melancholic reverie. But the tarn as well had inexplicably vanished, and in its place he found himself gliding the giddy verge of a precipitous chasm, and within the depths of this abyss he glimpsed scarlet horrors of indefinite shape that writhed and slithered in the most noxiously suggestive manner amidst miasmic and bubbling slime. It became indubitable that some malign transformation had been worked upon Zloigm's solitary domain, doubtless through the enchantments of an insidious and vindictive rival. Turning from the lip of the shadowy gulf, wherein whose deeps the half-glimpsed horrors had not ceased from their repugnant and profoundly disquieting wrigglings, the Necromancer sought again the sanctuary of his lone and solitary citadel, only to find a further encroachment of the metamorphosis, which he now saw to be progressive, for in the place of his somber and majestic tower there now rose an atrocious structure of virulent and nauseous hues, constructed according to the haphazard principles of some weird and prodigiously alien geometry. The eye-wrenching colors and dizzying, impossible curves and angles of the architectural abomination were utterly repugnant to one of his race and temperament. As he contemplated the loathsome spire with commingled bewilderment and ire, there slowly rose into view behind it an immense and dimly luminous orb of ghastly and leprous hue. Zloigm at once recognized the mottled and ebbing luminary for that wan, demising star about which the insect sages had informed him the else deserted world of the philosophic mold revolved. And there came to him there, as he stood amidst the festering grove of stalked and nodding fungi, some intimation of the extent of his predicament. It was not, as he had first conjectured, the malison of some iniquitous rival sorcerer which had worked this malevolent metamorphosis, but his own temerity in uttering the forbidden and blasphemic ritual. Indeed, so titanic had been his efforts to force the obdurate Crixil hither, that he had bent awry the very fabric of space itself, and his own somber spire, and the garish and atrocious abode of the alien entity now simultaneously occupied the same point in space and time. The fullest implications of this uncanny simultaneity did not at once dawn upon the cold intelligence of the Ophidian. Neither did he suffer undue dismay or perturbation at the ominous tendency of this sequence of transmutations, for he knew that the texture of space is pliable and resilient only to a degree, and that this unnatural condition could not long endure and would soon terminate, the superimposed towers returning each to its customary coin at opposite poles of the universe. As well, his memory retained spells and cantrips of prodigious and transcendent magnitude, the very utterance of which would summon to his aid, across the breadth of the cosmos itself if need be, demons and genii and elementals of awful and horrific mightiness, bound to his servitude by unsunderable vows. Therefore it was with a certain chill amusement, rather than with any trepidation, that he traversed the loathsome garden towards the alien spire of revolting configuration and nauseating hues. But of a sudden, he found the undulant gliding perambulation of his serpent kind now altered to a mode of peculiar and unseemly locomotion. In a word, he now moved forward by a singular crepitation of innumerous segmentations, and, turning his astounding vision upon his own person, he saw, by a sense of perception in nowise identical with sight, that the sequential transformation was now, presumably, complete, and that he himself had become interchanged with the being of the recalcitrant Crixil, and was now become a squirming and disgusting thing, like unto a white and crawling mold. The matrix of space and time shimmered and then grew stable again, but the alien panorama remained unchanged. He realized by this that the innate resilience of space had, as anticipated, reasserted itself. The unnatural simultaneity of the double tower had terminated, but that he remained trapped in this hideous travesty of a form, while, presumably, the mind and spirit of the mold philosopher currently resided in his own superior and comely body, doubtless even at this moment sampling the elaborate spectrum of sensuous and aesthetic pleasures the unique accommodations of his tower afforded. Even before the whelming realization, Zloigm did not deign to yield to despair, for the metamorphosed Ophidian knew that to give utterance to the name of but one of the potent genii who served him would undo this dreadful and nightmarish transmutation. He thought, therefore, to open his lipless mouth in order to cry aloud, in the hissing and sibilant speech of his kind, upon Marbas or Facalor, or Zepar or Bifrons, but no outward physical manifestation accompanied the mental command. Then, and then only, did the misfortunate necromancer taste the full bitterness of despair and horror, and savor the gall of the knowledge of his particular doom. For the sentient crawling white mold, whose body he now inhabited forever, quite naturally, alike all of its extinct kind, possessed no slightest vestige of the organs of audible speech.